The patrol car appears out of nowhere, not because you were doing something dramatic, but because you were simply driving. That sudden flash of blue and red in your rearview mirror changes the atmosphere inside your vehicle instantly. Your hands feel heavier on the wheel, your thoughts start to race ahead of reality, and the next few seconds feel longer than they should. You signal, you pull over, and now the world outside your window belongs to someone else for a moment. The officer steps closer. There is a pause before anything is said, and that silence alone carries weight. Then the first question comes, calm but direct. Do you know why I stopped you? Before we go any further, I want you to think about your own experience for a second. What is the most stressful or confusing thing that has ever happened to you during a traffic stop or when speaking with a police officer on the roadside? Share your experience in the comments, because what most people say in response to that question reveals something important about how these encounters actually play out in real life. And if you stay with me, I am going to break down 10 traffic stop rights you absolutely need to understand, along with the hidden realities behind how officers think, what they are observing, and why small mistakes often turn into bigger problems than they should. Most drivers think traffic stops are simple interactions with fixed rules. In reality, they are fast-moving psychological situations where perception, behavior, and timing matter just as much as legal rights. Officers are not just listening to your words. They are watching how quickly you respond, whether your story changes, how your eyes move, whether your hands stay visible, and even how your voice sounds when you answer basic questions. Let me start with something most people never fully appreciate. The moment the officer initiates the stop, they are already forming a working theory. Not a final judgment, not a legal conclusion, but a theory about whether this stop is routine or whether something feels off. That theory is shaped in seconds, sometimes before they even reach your window. Now here is where the first major right comes in, even though most drivers never think of it as a right at all. You have the right to remain calm and to control your own behavior inside the vehicle. That sounds obvious, but it matters more than people realize. Officers are trained to read sudden movements as potential risk indicators. Reaching too quickly into the glove compartment, turning your body abruptly, or even fumbling excessively can unintentionally escalate tension. This is why experienced drivers often keep their hands visible and move slowly when asked for documents. It is not about compliance for the sake of compliance. It is about managing perception in a high-pressure moment. Now let's talk about the second right, the right to understand why you were stopped. Officers will usually tell you the reason, but sometimes the explanation is brief or vague at first. Many drivers panic and immediately start defending themselves, which is one of the most common mistakes on the roadside. The officer has not asked for your defense yet. They are gathering information. When a driver starts explaining too much too soon, officers often interpret it as nervous overcompensation. That does not automatically mean guilt, but it can change the tone of the interaction. A better approach is often controlled patience. Listen first, respond clearly, and avoid filling silence with unnecessary explanations. The third right is the right to remain silent beyond identifying yourself in many situations. This is where reality becomes complicated because silence on the roadside is not the same as silence in a courtroom. Officers are allowed to ask questions, sometimes repeated questions, sometimes in slightly different wording to see if the answer changes. Picture this scenario. The officer asks where you are coming from. You answer quickly. Then they ask again a few moments later in a different tone. Many drivers interpret this as confusion, but from the officer perspective, it can be a consistency check. They are listening for changes in detail, hesitation, or uncertainty. This is also where passengers can unintentionally complicate things. A passenger who starts answering questions for you, correcting you, or laughing nervously can shift the dynamic. Officers are observing the entire environment, not just the driver. The fourth right is the right to keep your documents under control during the interaction. In many stops, officers will take your license, registration, and insurance to verify information. That is standard procedure in many places, but what most drivers do not realize is that time matters here. Long, unexplained delays can increase anxiety on both sides. From the officer perspective, stepping back into the patrol car to run checks is normal. But from the driver perspective, that silence inside your own car can feel uncomfortable, almost like waiting for a verdict. This is where imagination often runs ahead of reality. Drivers start assuming worst-case scenarios without any actual information. The fifth right is the right to be asked to step out of the vehicle in certain situations. Many people are surprised by this request and assume it signals serious trouble. In reality, officers often use this as a safety measure or a way to control the environment during further questioning. What matters here is how you respond in that moment. Hesitation is natural, but sudden resistance or aggressive questioning can shift the tone dramatically. Officers are trained to interpret resistance, even verbal resistance, as a potential escalation indicator. That does not mean you should blindly comply without understanding your rights, but it does mean tone and delivery matter significantly. Now, let's go deeper into something most drivers never consider, which is how officers evaluate micro-behavior. They are not just listening to answers. They are watching consistency between words and body language. A driver who says everything is fine but avoids eye contact, or keeps adjusting their posture, or speaks unusually fast, can unintentionally raise suspicion. This leads into the sixth right, which is the right not to be pressured into over-explaining yourself. Many officers will continue asking questions even after a driver has provided basic answers. This is not necessarily misconduct. It is part of information gathering. But drivers often feel psychological pressure to keep talking. The problem is that excessive talking can create contradictions. Even small inconsistencies in time, location, or sequence can be misinterpreted, especially under stress. Stress affects memory. That is a basic human reality. But in a traffic stop, it becomes extremely relevant. Now imagine another scenario. You are stopped at night. The officer shines a flashlight inside your car. They ask if there is anything illegal inside the vehicle. Your heart rate increases immediately. Most people assume this is a trick question, but in reality, it is often a broad safety inquiry. The danger for drivers is reacting emotionally instead of neutrally. The seventh right is the right to keep your interactions respectful even under pressure. This is not about submission. It is about control of tone. Officers are trained to de-escalate situations when drivers remain calm, but they are also trained to respond more firmly when they perceive hostility or sarcasm. A slight change in tone, even something as simple as sounding annoyed, can alter how the rest of the stop unfolds. That is why experienced drivers often focus less on winning the conversation and more on maintaining stability in the interaction. The eighth right involves passengers again, and this is one of the most misunderstood parts of traffic stops. Passengers may also be questioned depending on the situation. Many drivers assume the officer is targeting them unfairly, but from an officer perspective, passengers can be part of situational awareness. Here is what often happens. The driver is calm, but the passenger appears overly nervous, avoids eye contact, or interrupts. The officer begins shifting attention, not because guilt is assumed, but because behavior differences inside the same vehicle stand out. Drivers rarely realize how much officers rely on comparative behavior. It is not just what one person does, but how everyone in the vehicle behaves relative to each other. The ninth right is the right to ask for clarification before complying with unusual requests. For example, if an officer asks to search the vehicle, many drivers panic and either immediately refuse or immediately agree without understanding the situation. Both reactions can create complications. What matters more is clarity. Asking what the reason is, what is being looked for, or what the scope of the request is can help maintain control of the interaction. Officers are trained to interpret reasonable questions as part of normal communication, but tone still matters. Calm curiosity is very different from defensive interrogation. Now let's address something that almost every driver underestimates. The psychological pressure inside the vehicle does not stay hidden. Officers can often sense when a driver is overwhelmed, even if the driver is trying to appear calm. That internal pressure can lead to small mistakes like forgetting basic documents, mispronouncing simple answers, or contradicting earlier statements. This brings us to the 10th right, which is the right to understand that you are allowed to slow down your responses. There is no requirement to rush your words. Many drivers feel compelled to answer immediately to avoid suspicion, but rushed answers often create confusion. A measured response, even if slightly delayed, is usually better than a fast, inaccurate one. The key is consistency and clarity, not speed. Now let's step back and look at something deeper that ties all of this together. Traffic stops are not just legal encounters, they are controlled environments of observation. Officers are trained to manage risk, gather information, and maintain safety. Drivers, on the other hand, are often focused on fear, confusion, or frustration. That mismatch in mindset is where most problems begin. For example, when an officer asks a repeated question, many drivers assume they are being tested or challenged personally. But from the officer side, repetition can be a tool to confirm consistency or to observe behavior under slight pressure. Humans tend to change details when stressed. Officers know this and are trained to notice it. Or consider the moment when documents are taken back to the patrol car. Many drivers assume something is wrong at that exact moment. In reality, it is often standard procedure to verify identity, check records, or ensure the vehicle status is clear. The silence feels longer than it actually is. Another important reality is that officers are also managing their own risk assessment in real time. Every stop is different. A simple speeding stop can remain routine, or it can shift depending on what is observed. That is why they pay close attention to early behavior. But here is something most drivers never hear. Many escalations during traffic stops are not caused by the original reason for the stop. They are caused by how the interaction unfolds afterward. Tone, impatience, sudden movement, or defensive language often matter more than the initial violation itself. That does not mean drivers are powerless. It means awareness changes outcomes. Understanding how perception works in these moments can prevent unnecessary tension. Think about how often people say later that the stop was fine until a certain moment. Usually that moment is not a legal turning point, it is a communication turning point. Maybe the driver interrupted, maybe the officer felt ignored, maybe tone shifted slightly. These small things accumulate quickly in a confined roadside environment where both people are already alert. And then there is silence. Silence is one of the most misunderstood elements of a traffic stop. Drivers often feel they must fill it. Officers often use it to observe. Neither side is necessarily wrong, but the meaning changes depending on context. A calm, patient silence can actually reduce tension. An anxious silence can increase it. The difference is not in the absence of words, but in the behavior during that absence. As we move through all of this, there is a common thread that keeps appearing again and again. Traffic stops are less about winning arguments and more about managing interactions. The driver who understands this is often the driver who experiences smoother outcomes. Still, many people only learn this after a stressful or confusing encounter. They replay the moment later, thinking about what they should have said or how they should have acted. That reflection is often where real understanding begins. And maybe that is the part most worth paying attention to. Because the next time those blue lights appear in your rearview mirror, it will not just be about what the law allows or what the officer asks. It will be about how you interpret the moment in real time, under pressure, with everything moving faster than your thoughts want it to. And in that moment, the difference between confusion and control often comes down to awareness you already had before the stop even began.